Welcome. Thank you all so much for taking the time to join this webinar. Today, Lana from Rainbow Collection and myself are really excited to explore this month's webinar topic, which is all about how automated lifecycle assessment platforms and sustainability consultancies can work together to create impact, with a deep dive into how we can work together to measure and reduce carbon emissions. So before we dive into the webinar, I think it's really great just to provide a quick introduction to who Lana and myself are. So I can go first. Hi, I'm Charlie. I'm the sustainability expert here at Root. Before Root, I was working as a consultant for over 4 years, and I've also worked in-house at Amazon Fashion. And I've supported over 80 companies on their sustainability journeys by helping businesses create and implement sustainability strategies, certifies B Corps, and use lifecycle assessment to create impact within organizations. So just going to hand over to you, Dana, for a quick intro.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Lana, and I'm working for Rainbow Collection as an impact strategist. And Rainbow Collection is an impact agency that helps companies develop sustainability strategies and also B Corp certification. But more about that later. Let's first dive into the root part.
Definitely. Let's jump in. So in this webinar, we'll be covering a quick introduction to who Root and Rainbow Collection is. And then we will be providing an overview of the Root Rainbow Collection partnership and how we are collaborating together to create impact. And then after that short presentation, Lana and I are going to have a really kind of just informal conversation focusing on a number of topics, including how to measure carbon emissions, including the crucial Scope 3 emissions, and how sustainability consultancies and automated lifecycle assessment platforms can work together. And then at the end, there'll be lots of time for questions at the end. So there's the chat function in this call. So if you have any questions, feel free to add them in the chat or write them down to ask in the Q&A at the end. So let's dive in, and let's start with a quick introduction to who Root is. So calculating your company's footprint can be incredibly complex and time-consuming, especially for product companies seeking to understand the impact.
Sorry, Charlie, if there's any screen, if you're showing any presentation, I don't see it on the screen. I don't know how it is for the others, but I only see all the people that are involved in the meeting, let's say.
Same.
Oh, okay. One sec. Let me just... Can you see? One sec. How about now?
Yep.
Better.
Great.
Yep.
Good to know. Good to know that I'm sharing the screen. Thanks for flagging that. So as I mentioned, calculating your company's footprint can be incredibly complex and time consuming, especially for product companies seeking to understand the impact of all their products. That's why we've created Root. Root is a collaborative platform to collect the right data, gain insight, and improve the lifecycle impacts of all the products within companies. So our vision is to redefine the norm by making product footprints universal. And we are on a mission to automate lifecycle assessment at scale for everyone. So why do we think that lifecycle assessment is the solution? Well, firstly, companies urgently need affordable and scalable access to all their product footprints. This is crucial in today's business environment for several reasons. Firstly, product footprints are needed to comply with regulations such as the Green Claims Directive and CSRD, and these regulations are not optional. Companies must report effectively on these frameworks to avoid greenwashing and avoid severe fines. Product footprints are also essential for business growth and for transparency. So meeting transparency demands is essential for retaining customers and winning tenders with stakeholders like retailers. Also, accurate product footprints and Scope 3 data can help drive product innovation and accelerate companies' net zero journey, which is something which we'll be touching upon later in this call. So we think and we believe firmly that lifecycle assessment is essential. However, there are several challenges with traditional lifecycle assessments. Firstly, they are They're far too complex, they're fully manual, and they're very expensive. It's also not scalable as each lifecycle assessment is on a single product. Lifecycle assessments are also inaccessible. These assessments are often only accessible to academics and lifecycle assessment experts, leaving the majority of companies without the necessary internal knowledge and tools to really use them. And lastly, lifecycle assessments are inefficient. Aligning all stakeholders can be a very complex and time-consuming process. And that's why we created Root. Our platform offers a SaaS solution that is firstly scalable, so it's capable of handling thousands of life cycles at once. It's fast, it delivers results in 1 to 6 months, and lastly, it's user-friendly. No prior life cycle assessment knowledge is required. We have a saying at Root that you share the data and we take care of the rest. So just kind of providing an overview of our approach and how Root works. Our platform integrates seamlessly with various software systems, collecting and iterating data to reduce environmental impact. We use artificial intelligence and algorithms to centralize your data and create dynamic lifecycle assessment dashboards for you to understand your impact. Ultimately, what this is doing is converting complex lifecycle assessment information into simple, easy to understand insights that you can use to drive impact in your company. So kind of the last slide here is really just showing you what our typical approach of working with customers looks like. So we start with a kickoff call where we set up your Root account and we can create an action plan with a timeline. The next step is to collect the data. So what we would do is define the scope of the LCA with you and then work with you to upload your data using our data collection modules. We guide you through each step of this process. The next step is to measure, which is really what Root does behind the scenes. So we're transforming your product data into actionable impact metrics, automatically calculating your company and product footprints. And then the last step, which is the most exciting bit, is acting. So using the data and insights to communicate your impact authentically, identify hotspots, set reduction targets, and drive sustainability performance in your company. So that's just a quick overview of Root and our platform. I'm now going to hand over to you, Lana, to provide an introduction to Rainbow Collection.
Yes, thanks, Charlie. So I briefly wanted to refer back to the goal of this webinar is to letting you understand how to get going with Scope 3 emissions and how you can make progress without making it too complex and then let perfectionism get in your way. So Charlie introduced Root already for a bit and also what LCA is. And where Root is more the technical data-driven expert, Rainbow Collection is more like a strategic coach. So that can help you in a more practical way, for example, how to make the translation from data to daily practice. So actually how to deploy the things that you know. We are an impact agency that helps companies to develop sustainability strategies, but our focus is mainly on impact coaching. Meaning that we are engaged in the process of implementing the strategy and also engaging the right people and ensuring that they have everything that they need. So we start collaborating with Root because it appeared quite a good combination. But to start with, we were founded with the vision that we're in need of market transformation, as you see on this slide. Because within this model, it means that we need to make a shift from the left side to the right side. You see the horizontal line, that's like the zero line, where we have zero impact or footprint. And when you have a look on the left side, you see companies are more occupied with below the line impact or risk management over there. So compliance with laws and regulations, such as the CSRD that you might all know. And in the process of becoming more sustainable, they move to the right. So on the right side, companies are occupied with more above the line impact, and now they can contribute to something positive and find impact opportunities and future-proof sustainable business models. So with the strategies and coaching that we do, we help companies to make that shift and identify where they are today and what also opportunities are to start moving to the right. And we do that, not just by delivering sustainability strategies, but also work on a culture for change. So we see the strategy more as a structure for change, And on the other side, there's a culture for change, as you see on the next slide. Because we can deploy smart systems and plans, but it's still the people that need to get the work done. So we need to engage these people and also ensure that they have everything they need for successful implementation. And that's more about like ownership, setting up the right teams, feeling responsible, but also expertise, for example, understanding your sustainability topics. It's about willingness to get going, but it's also about resources. So for example, time, budget, or availability of data. So that's right there are two angles that make it relevant for us to collaborate with Root. So the first is we focus on coaching. So there can be data, but we want to focus on what comes after. What are you going to do with that data and make it practical? And the second is, we focus on effective strategies, and climate impacts, it's a very relevant topic in most impact strategies. And with easy carbon calculations for products and scope 3, which often represent most of the impact, we can collect and map emissions in a more easier way to create also more effective strategies. So when we go to the next one, we can dive a little bit more into the second argument, which is about scope 3. And here we see again, including scope 3 is also really including most of the time your products and or your value chain partners. Because to effectively reduce emissions, you should know what you're emitting and where these emissions are coming from. And that's where carbon calculations come in. So in short, you might already know this because it's quite familiar already for most of you, but scope 1 and 2 is your direct emissions, for example, your energy and fuel use, and scope 3 is more indirect emissions, which might happen because of your decisions, but they're not directly expelled by you. So they happen throughout the life cycle of a product, for example, as Charlie explained. But most of the relevant frameworks we're facing now, such as SBTI or CSRD, they state that it's that it's important that when half of your emissions are in scope 3 or even more, you must include them in your plans and targets. But the question still remains like how to do that in an effective way. What we often see is that companies do need to collect data, and they might already do, but that the data collection shouldn't become a goal in itself. So it should be more like a means for effective footprint reduction. And our time should not be soaked up by collecting perfect figures if it keeps us from moving forward. So we, as partners now, we wanted to make things easier and action-driven. So Root and Rainbow Collection are collaborating as partners. If you want to go to the next slide, Charlie. Which means that we both focus on our own expertise, but we see a synergy in combining these. As Rainbow Collection, we noticed some sort of gap actually between ways available to map your footprint. So like you see on the slide, it's like rough estimates on the one hand, as Charlie mentioned already, like manual calculations in Excel, manually adjusting them when new emission factors are published. And then accuracy is still quite low, and the amount of assumptions remain high. And I wanted to say, like, if this is getting you started, that's still great, and it's a good way to get started, but it might be relevant for you to also look in more detail or take a next step, dependent of your profile as an organization. And on the other hand, we see like the more, we call it like the clunky big software packages, but more like the costly and time-consuming LCAs. Those are really precise, but also most of the time take up 2 to 3 months per product sometimes, and quite some budget. So that's not really scalable. And Root, kind of filling this gap with automated and scalable calculations. And as impact strategists, we at Rainbow Collection can strategically use these insights to develop an effective climate strategy for our clients. So where you do use substantiated data to take effective action, and then without the process taking too much of your time. So there, the value really is in directly making concrete insights really practical and effective. And we want to get practical because we really need to act now, and it is about reduction. So we just launched at Rainbow Collection our more or less standardized methods, which you see on the next slide, to set up carbon strategies. And in this one, we kind of follow the following steps. And we, Rainbow Collection versus Root, collaborate in this to easily conduct a baseline, which you see for the first step, in which, we can then make impact calculations with Root. And that's then the foundation for the second step, the hotspots, which we identify, and in which we, Rainbow Collection, can help map these against not only carbon impacts, so not only the amount of emissions, but also we look at the amount of influence you have over this topic, what the costs are if you're investing in reducing measures, so you can more easily plan what to do when, according, for example, to the available budget of your teams. And then what you see at the final step, we translate this into strategy with concrete pillars and programs, and of course also reduction measures and a roadmap in which these measures are planned over time. So when that's final, we really want to get going with this, and then the impact coaching part of our role comes in. So we often do that in the form of coaching by planning kickoffs, for example, give support to the relevant teams, or organize trainings for them to just guide them throughout the process. But by starting this this 3-step plan with Roots, we can increase accuracy and effectiveness of a climate program because we have more accurate data. And that's especially for example, retail and fashion and other product-related companies. Carbon reduction will mainly derive from opportunities for Scope 3. And these opportunities become now more clear because it's possible to calculate them in an easier way. So when we move one slide forward, it's in short how we collaborate. On the one hand, we have Roots, which is the calculator, the tag expert for scalable products and product calculations based on LCA methodology. And on the other hand, we have Rainbow Collection as translator, actually. So we strategically use the insights to set up a successful reduction plan, train your people, and coach you towards impact. And that's the synergy we see between LCA platforms on the one hand and sustainability consultancies on the other. And that's kind of the win-win of getting automated insights as detailed as we can get, because we still use LCA methodology, but also make it very practical by paying most attention to what we can do with the data. To let you get a little bit more familiar with how this works, you could test Root with a 3-month pilot instead of the annual subscription or membership they work with usually. And if you join this webinar afterwards, you can try that with a 15% discount to just check and test whether this works for you and whether the platform does what you're looking for to calculate your products in more detail. And from our side, like the 3-step approach we just mentioned, we just launched that as our carbon product called Cut Your Carbon. And that 3-step approach is really towards a reduction strategy to get started with your footprint as soon as possible. At the end of this session, we will highlight both in a small handout, and we can send that by you throughout email with some more information and also with the key learnings and questions that we discussed during this hour. But before we wrap up, like Charlie said already, we have some more topics and questions to discuss. So do you have anything to start with, Charlie?
Yes, definitely. So exciting to hear about Rainbow Collection's new climate program. So Lana, you briefly kind of explained what Scope 1, 2, 3 emissions are and how our partnership really focuses on Root providing carbon footprint data for Rainbow Collection's clients. I think the first key question to really start this kind of conversation is, why are Scope 3 emissions so crucial to measure and reduce?
Yeah, we briefly touched upon that, of course. I think most of you are in the basis familiar with Scope 1, 2, 3. But again, like scope 1 is direct emissions from company-owned vehicles or facilities, for example. Scope 2 is more about like purchase energy mainly, electricity. And scope 3 is really the indirect emissions across the entire value chain. So that can be from raw materials up to product disposal, the emissions your suppliers expel, outsourced logistics, etc. So we can think of scope 3 more or less as an iceberg analogy. So where scope 1 and 2 emissions are more like the tip of the iceberg, the bulk of emissions are more beneath the surface in scope 3. So that's also where most significant opportunities for reduction lie, and related to the decisions you make on the product level, for example, or with the partners you collaborate with. And why scope 3 is so important? Well, because the bulk is laying there. So mainly, or most of the time, we see at our clients that around 90% is in there. But it's, of course, dependent on the type of company you are and what your value chain looks like, of course. But many companies struggle to collect scope 3 data. And that is, for example, because lifecycle assessments are really time-consuming and costly. But yeah, there are also consequences for not measuring scope 3. For example, if you set net zero targets, they could be more misleading if you don't include scope 3. And we see that, for example, with organization Crocs from the footwear. They made like a net zero target only based on scope 1 and 2. And then including scope 3 data, they had to delay their net zero target for 10 years because a lot of extra emissions were included. Another thing why it's so important is also a risk for greenwashing, for example, because companies may make environmental claims without really supporting product data. And then you might face legal risks or loss of stakeholder trust, for example. And because it's more and more important, also from a legal side or a compliance side, there's an increasing demand for scope 3 data. So companies are also increasingly responding to that questions and demands. Sometimes by conducting a few LCAs, for example, or using rough estimates, like we said, like the two sites, the two ways available to easily calculate. But if you calculate emissions from materials or transport or packaging separately, that's still a great start because it's already activating you to get going. But it's also less accurate than focusing on the more details, like you can do, for example, with roots. And then if you have a less accurate method, you should revise that maybe in the future. So it's really good to already think about what is possible for you within your company profile, to get started with this part. That makes it already quite clear why scope 3 is really important. And I'm really curious also for everyone who is joining how that looks like. But maybe, Charlie, can you dive a little bit deeper in what you think key challenges are for companies and what they face when they start measuring their scope 3?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Lana. So when talking to companies who are starting to measure their carbon emissions, in particular scope 3, there are three common challenges companies face. The first is really around data availability and accuracy. So measuring scope 1 and 2 emissions is a relatively straightforward process since these emissions are within the company's control. Scope 3 is much more complex as it includes measuring emissions from processes outside of the company's immediate control, such as the emissions from their suppliers or how the product is used after it leaves the company's hands. So in kind of carbon accounting, in the carbon accounting world, this is referred to as upstream and downstream emissions. So this is really a common challenge that companies face, is that they really struggle to understand and collect the data on their value chain, as it requires extensive coordination with external stakeholders like suppliers. Another key challenge that companies have is that they don't have transparent supply chains. So often, this is really the case with companies that have a global network of suppliers, or there's certain sectors which notoriously have untransparent supply chains. Fashion really comes to mind. It's very known, and it's very common for fashion companies to not have visibility into their supply chain beyond tier 1 suppliers. So for these companies who don't have full transparency on their supply chain, tracking and collecting data on the carbon impact of their supply chain can be a really daunting and time-consuming process. But improving the supply chain transparency is a must-needed thing in any company's sustainability journey, but really it's very important in order to measure accurate Scope 3 emissions. And kind of the last key challenge that we find with companies is a lack of internal capacity and knowledge around carbon accounting. So measuring carbon emissions, particularly Scope 3, can be a really resource-heavy and time-consuming process, as I mentioned, and companies can struggle to collect and report their emissions. And so collect their emissions and report their carbon footprints, which is best practice to do on an annual basis. So this process really requires a dedicated internal team and extensive coordination with external stakeholders to measure and report carbon footprints. So when talking to clients around these challenges, we do find that working with automated LCA platforms like Root can really help address these challenges. Firstly, because automated lifecycle assessments like Root automatically map out your supply chain. So it makes the process of mapping and understanding your supply chain much more efficient. Automated lifecycle assessments also generate thousands of product carbon footprints and the company's carbon footprints at once. So it really speeds up the process of measuring your carbon footprint. And kind of last thing to mention is that automated lifecycle assessment platforms are easy to understand. So typically no prior carbon accounting experience is needed. Kind of one last thing to mention here is that the number one question that we have when we talk to clients around carbon footprints is it okay if there's data gaps in my carbon footprint? So ideally, if possible, it's great not to have any data gaps, as your carbon footprint data is the foundation of any kind of climate strategy or climate efforts. However, being realistic, sometimes in the first couple of years, it's not unusual for there to be a lack of data in certain cases, and companies sometimes make assumptions or use proxy data. What's essential here is that if you are doing this, is that you are completely transparent when reporting your carbon footprint. So when you're reporting your carbon footprint, you're very transparent. You're highlighting when data in the carbon footprint is based on estimates rather than data which you've collected. And kind of one last thing to mention is, as mentioned, it's really best practice to measure your carbon footprints annually. So if there are gaps if there are data gaps, we really recommend that you learn from the process and you reflect on the challenges of gathering Scope 3 data, and then iterate the carbon measurement process for future years. So just continually building and improving your carbon measurement process.
Mm-hmm. That's also like the benefit of Root, right? Because your LCA is like live and you can update it like every time, and it just gets optimized throughout the process.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly it. It's always updating, like you said, Lana. So if there is a change, you have a new supplier, for example, and you add new carbon data, it's automatically reflected in your carbon footprint.
So yeah, so it grows with you actually.
Exactly. So it's clearly really important that measuring, reducing carbon emissions is very important. Lana, it would be great to know, just from your experience with consulting and helping companies with measuring their Scope 3 emissions, what if I was a company, hypothetically, who was beginning the process of measuring their Scope 3 emissions, what tangible next steps would you recommend that they take right now?
Yeah, that's a good one, because that's a question that we hear quite often. And I think, again, that it's one thing to highlight here is that companies still should start measuring and reducing their carbon footprint, rather imperfect today than perfect tomorrow, because in the end we all need to reduce. So that's the most important thing, because we still have a long way to go and just need action. But that's already mentioned, but of course also a very important one. And tangible next steps, I think they can be bucketed like into 3 steps. So it starts, of course, with understanding your emissions. So start by identifying which activities specifically for you fall under scope 1, 2, and 3, using the greenhouse gas protocol, of course, because that's like the holy grail of starting with emissions, but also based on your company profile and core activities. Because this ensures that you capture like a complete picture of your carbon footprint and also avoid like double counting. And it helps you understand, also which teams within your organization you need to collect the relevant data. And then step 2, logically, is creating a team. Like, you need data for your carbon footprint, and that often spans like across multiple business areas. Multiple teams within your organization. For example, procurement, your category teams, facilities, supply chain, HR. It's quite broad. So it's important to identify which teams within your organization hold what data specifically, because that can also differ, of course, per company, and also in what format and what is still missing. You can set up like a CSR team or a cross-departmental team to start collecting this data. And then step 3, or the final step, is that you actually start gathering and calculating. So you can engage stakeholders, and that could be both colleagues, but also like external partners. For example, a supplier that can provide you with the bill of materials. And then you start collecting data together with those stakeholders. And when you engage them early on, you can also ensure more accuracy across the different stakeholders or teams that you engage. You can use the collected data to calculate scope 1 and 2 and 3 emissions with emission factors, for example, that are most of the time publicly available. And there are already many companies that streamline this process by using software as a service, for example, or some sort of carbon accounting platforms. So that, I think that's bucketed like the 3 main steps to start with, and you can follow that up, for example, with engaging an independent third party to verify the footprint that you calculated, but also, and that's a very important one, monitoring the process and reflecting on challenges. So you might set up like a system with these 3 steps, you're starting, but you want to annually repeat that maybe. And you want to reflect on the learnings, of course, and challenges that you face throughout that process. So like that, you can iterate also the process and keep on improving year after year. And we already mentioned it briefly, but because many of our clients have a climate program within their strategies, we developed that 3-step approach. And you can find that on a new platform that we launched with Rainbow Collection called via Thinkific. And you can receive like guided steps with that approach towards a carbon reduction strategy. And that's starts with like a starter pack, quite basic, towards a more advanced pack in which we'll do the baseline with roots. So you have really detailed figures to go with. I think that's the most important ones to mention. And we also already briefly touched this, Charlie, but can you like summarize or share again how sustainability consultancies and LCA platforms can most effectively work together to measure those scope 3, mainly for effectiveness in climate strategies?
Yes, definitely. And I think measuring scope 3 emissions presents this excellent opportunity for LCA platforms and consultancies to work together, because many LCA platforms can create product footprints and that essential scope 3 data that is so needed for effective climate strategies. So Lana, kind of as you've mentioned, this is really the main way that Root and Rainbow Collection are partnering together. As you've mentioned, Lana, Root is offering this 3-month pilot with Rainbow Connections clients where we will be working with them in those 3 months to help them measure, understand, and reduce their carbon footprints, including this crucial scope 3 emissions. So to give an example of how in practice this could work and how LCA platforms and sustainability consultancies can work together around this, I think it's helpful to provide a quick overview of how Root will work with Rainbow Collections clients to calculate their carbon footprints. And this is done in 3 key steps. So the first step is that we will work with Rainbow Collections clients for them to upload their data onto Root's platform. So Root needs information about companies' purchase and sales orders to automatically map out their supply chain, and then additional information about their products, suppliers, and transport routes. Once all this data is uploaded, Root will then, in the background, be working hard to generate thousands of product life cycles at once. And what this is really doing is converting the company's product data into impact data. And the outcome of this is that it will create a company-wide carbon footprint and a carbon footprint for each product in the company's product portfolio. So Root's LCA databases will give companies a comprehensive view of all of their products, scope 1, 2, and the crucial scope 3 emissions. And the last key step in the way that Root will be working with Rainbow Collections clients, for example, is to really make the most and to take action with those insights. So Root's LCA databases and dashboards will give companies a comprehensive view of their products' scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, and they'll also identify which materials or processes contribute the most to the company's carbon emissions. Additionally, companies can use Root's Scenario Builder to test different ways to reduce their products' carbon footprints. So really what this is Root is going to provide Rainbow Collections clients detailed product level insights and scope 3 emission data, which companies can use to really implement the changes to reduce their carbon footprint. So Lana, now that I've explained how LCA platforms like Root can create carbon footprints, maybe it'll be helpful to explain how companies like Rainbow Collections clients can use these carbon footprints to build effective climate strategies.
Yeah, it's we already explained, of course, that scope 3 must be part of climate strategies, and that accurate insights are helpful for an effective plan. But the collaboration between LCA platforms like you and impact agencies like us helps companies with guidance on their sustainability journeys, mainly because there's a lot of value in mapping and also measuring carbon footprints, because it's really the foundation of that reduction plan, and that's a very important one, because scope 3 is a very big part of that. And to name some examples of how that works in practice is, for example, it can help drive product innovation. A lot of scope 3 emissions are in your for product-focused companies within your product, of course, and the complete life cycle of them. And if you compare like product A to product B, or create like a scenario analysis, like you mentioned with the scenario builder within your tool, you can model like a product with a more sustainable material, for example, or a more sustainable process, and that helps you make decisions that are related to more sustainable design, for example, of your product, or working with a different supplier that works in a different way. Another one is that it can help you with substantiating green claims to align with the ACM, for example, like the anti-greenwashing guidelines that we also all know, possibly, because your claims are then science-based or data-driven, and they're backed up with calculations. So you can state like the material in this product emits X% less carbon than the previous, for example. And it can also help you with regulatory compliance, with a spotlight, for example, on CSRD. That's the big one that everybody has in mind right now, of course. But also the more climate-related, like more specific standards and targets that you can also use the data-driven and science-based data for. So the expertise and focus of Roots versus Rainbow Collection just fits quite well together because of the technical expert that you are, and offering the tools and making the calculations, with us on the other side as like more creative and strategic agency, really deploying what you what you calculated and what turns out of your analysis. So we can then create more strategic plan to act upon that knowledge, and also use those product innovation and also green claims within that strategy as an output. So I think that's the main highlights for that. I hope we already tapped into some questions with this last part of the webinar that you have as well. But there might also be some questions left in the chat.
In the chat there are still quite some questions.
Yes. I think before we jump into kind of the questions and the Q&A, I think one thing to really highlight is everything you said, Lana, around kind of the ways we can work together for carbon emission and for carbon footprints. That can also really be applied to just how LCA platforms and sustainability consultancies can work together beyond carbon. So just thinking about just general support on a wide range of environmental issues. So stuff like helping with green claims, or helping with product innovation, or helping with complying with regulations. This is so important for carbon emissions, but also this is really important just for wider sustainability initiatives. So yeah, it's so exciting. I'm really excited for this collaboration, Lana. I think it's going to be fantastic.
And let's check the last minutes that we have for indeed some questions that are still left open. I see that Ellen was wondering, like, she's busy with collecting data, but not yet on the scope 3 level, if I understand rightly. And when would be the best time to possibly involve Rainbow Collection? It can be two ways. Like, we can start a collaboration with Root Rainbow Collection at the start, so we can just guide you also in the data collection phase that would be with Root's platform, but we just can guide you throughout the process, and our actual activities and help come after that, because we use the outputs from Root in the coaching section, in the coaching phase. So that's where we start using and deploying the data to build a strategy, and that starts with identifying hotspots. So ideally, you would include the scope 3 emissions via Root and calculate them as well. And then if you have the export from that, or you have fully insight in the platform, we can do a hotspot analysis in which we, like I mentioned, not only includes carbon impact, but also like the amount of influence you have over the topic and potential investments if you would start reducing. And then I think there's a next question for more addressed at you, Charlie. Like, for what kind of products is Root most suitable? Do you have some sort of specific focus? How wide is your involvement with different organizations? Can you answer that one?
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good question. So right now, Root works with a wide range of different companies in different industries. We typically, our ideal company would be a company which has a wide range and a large number of products in its product portfolio. That's kind of what we really look for here, because that's really the magic of Root, is that we can conduct, as I said, kind of thousands of product life cycles at once. So ideally, we love working with companies which have a really broad range and a large number of products in their product portfolio, but we don't have any preference on any kind of particular type of sector. So yeah, we work with fashion clients, food clients, for example. And I can see your question around kind of the range around pricing of LCA per product. That's something which we're currently in discussion about changing. So I can send that information in a follow-up email to you. I've just made a note of that to follow up with you on that one.
Yeah, and I think one question that also relates to your side, Charlie, is on what data LCAs for products are based. Because in the question is also, is it based on spend-based data, No, I think it's activity based, but I think also that you can explain that in more detail.
So the key pieces of information that we're looking for in the LCA is firstly your purchase and your sales orders. We use that to map your supply chain. And then we also need information about your bill of materials for each of your products in your product portfolio. And then information about the environmental performance and some information around environmental data around your suppliers, and then also your transport routes. So what we do is from looking at your purchase and your sales orders, we map out your supply chain with the logistic routes, and we need to understand what transport is being used in each of the logistic routes.
Yeah, and then in addition to that, I think it's also interesting for most of the people joining, like what does make Root more scalable than other LCA software as services, because that's quite a unique approach, of course, that Root has. And what makes, what could you explain about the difference with other platforms?
I think one key difference in terms of scalability, I think it is very much around that we are our product is scalable. We can conduct thousands of life cycles assessments. One key thing which separates us from other LCA platforms is not necessarily scalability, but it's the broad range of environmental metrics that we look at. So from looking at competitors, some of our competitors are only looking at 1 or 2 environmental metrics, whereas for us, we are assessing a wide range of environmental issues, which we categorize into 6 impact categories. And the reason why this makes us different is that it means that when you are working with Root, it means you have a really holistic understanding about the environmental impact of your business. So it means that you don't have any siloed thinking where you're only thinking about 1 or 2 environmental factors because that's what the platform is providing you data on. You have a really comprehensive, holistic overview of your product's environmental impact, which you can use to really make effective and data-driven decisions to reduce your environmental impact of your products.
Yeah, and also using like as much primary data as there is already available, and adding to that with secondary data, of course. But yeah, in that process of continuously iterating, it's also like a continuous update, I can imagine, with primary data, because you start the process, but throughout the process, more primary data is of course added, and that makes it some sort of optimization cycle, of course, which is really handy. And then one more I see from Ellen is can you assist in setting science-based targets? Yes, I think when we create and develop a strategy, we only look at like science-based targets, net zero standard kind of targets, because that's like a guiding standard, of course. So I think that's most of the time like incorporated already, like setting midterm targets, setting long-term targets that are compliant or similar to the one required by SBTi. So I think that's reflected in the strategy we develop, and that's more easy to incorporate because we calculate with Root, for example, and we have more like feeling and more insight in that scope 3 part. And of course, science-based targets often, or they also say like if scope 3 is more than 40% of your total footprint, you really need to set targets for at least 2/3 of that scope 3. So that's enabled by having more accurate data.
Just to have a clear understanding on the science-based targets, there it's not so you follow the rules of the SBTi, but it's not that you follow the same, let's say, rules, but it's not that you can officially say we have the targets approved for by the SBTi.
Yeah, you can share them with SBTi, with the official initiative, of course, and they can revise or review your targets to get official how do you call it, like that they mark them as approved by SBTI. But that's then a process that you can also guide with your own team and have that communication with SBTI. And we're on the content side, supporting with the strategy, and that strategy is aligned with SBTI targets.
Yeah. So SBTI. Sorry if I'm going into the topic too deep, but SBTI, of course, is not obligatory for CSRD. In this case, for us, it's CSRD.
No, that's still very helpful for CSRD.
Yeah. So we can skip the official part with the SBTI, but if we would work together with the Rainbow, we would be sure that we are in line with the target set to get to the climate neutral 2050 part.
Yeah, we can set as a target at the beginning of the process, like, okay, we want to achieve like SBTI approved targets, and then we just follow the standards and have sufficient data to be able to do that, and form a strategy aligning SBTI.
And then again, in line with the first question I had, the first step for us is data collection on scope 1, scope 2, which is a bit more easy for dummies like us than scope 3. But how much of the scope 3 data would you need to really set some valued or some decent targets, let's say, on the emissions?
Yeah, SBTI, for example, says it must be at least like 2/3 of your scope 3, but then still that's always remains a little bit abstract, because it's hard to say like, okay, this is 100% of my scope 3, because it's abstract, because it's indirect and it's within the value chain, and you never have it like fully covered, or maybe that takes a long time. So that's still like, you should share an explanation of how you reasonably state that is 2/3 of your total scope 3. So you must include then your products and your supplier and processes, logistics, and all the main parts of scope 3, and then include them in your targets and explain why that is your approach on your scope 3. But SBTI says it has to be 66%, but it's hard to make it so concrete for yourself, I can imagine.
No, especially when I know Root is supporting in the LCA and do it quickly and do it optimized, more or less. But still, if you are on scope 3 and we have 1,200 products, unique products, so we need to get the bill of material of all those products and the packing, blah, blah, blah. And the assortment is changing every year with, I don't know, 25%. So it's difficult to decide, okay, this is where we start the, let's say, zero measurement for the scope, for the targets on reduction.
Yeah, I think maybe Charlie can explain a little bit, because Root is also focusing on some sort of 80-20 rule, like starting with the products that represent most of your footprint, and then add the rest later. But you should focus on the most important ones first, and then I can imagine it's still quite a challenge if products are quickly changing and the assortment is quickly changing. But you start off with like the main products, isn't that right, Charlie?
Yes, exactly. So as you said, you start with your most important products and you kind of iterate as the process goes, but really kind of the process is to really just start the process and provide as much data as you can initially, and then you just work and you provide more data as you're collecting it into the platform. And kind of, as mentioned before, the dashboards are continually updating with the new information that's provided. So the more you can start before you have all the data available, if that's what I'm saying. And
then maybe we have a time for one last question, and then I see one more in the chat that's from Joris asking, like, what do you do when you do not have the bill of materials yet? Because that's some sort of data gap, and how can you complete an LCA without having that information?
it's a good question, and a question which we're often asked. So with Roots LCA, you do need to have the bill of materials to do the LCA, because the bill of materials is providing the detailed information about the materials in each of your products, and we really need that information in an LCA to assess the impact of your materials on your total environmental and carbon footprint. So it's the short answer is yes, we do need a bit of materials, but when we have clients who can't provide that, we work with them to work with their internal systems and their data systems to try and get the data which we can provide, saying that with the majority of companies, they do have a bit of materials, so they can provide this information.
Yeah, and it's often also, I guess, that you start off with like main categories and get more specifically diving into the specifics of a material later on in the process. So you get it more detailed, step by step.
Exactly.
Okay, I think that were quite some, quite relevant extra questions that we could discuss. I hope most of the questions are answered in a good way, and that you enjoyed the story that we shared with you. We will collect some main things that we shared today, and also some key questions and answers within one handout, and we will send it per email to everybody who joined the webinar, together with the products of Roots offering the pilot and Rainbow Collection the 3-step carbon approach. Whether or when you would like to have some more information about that, you can always contact us about it, of course. But for now, thanks for your participation. Hope you enjoyed.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And have a good rest of the day.